welcome back. In this video I'm going to be looking at two things. I'm going to be looking at white balance bracketing and I'm going to be looking at custom white balance. So first of all I'll just talk about white balance bracketing. Now in the menu I showed you in the last video, there's an option to shift the white balance, so you can either make it more blue if you want your images cooler, or more amber, or more green, or more magenta. So it's a way of correcting, and you can do it along any axis in that range to make your images cooler or warmer, or put a little bit of color in the images that you want depending on which way you want to go. So that's really handy. Now in that same menu, let me just go into there. With the joystick you can move that color balance little dot around, so that lets you correct for the color balance, but also you can actually scroll the scroll bar here, the settings bar, and you'll notice you see those little white bars separating, so you end up with 3 dots on your scale here. And what that allows you can use either one, the top one or the bottom one, and what that allows you to do is take 3 exposures with different white balances at those 3 points. So let's say you want to take a cooler shot, a middle shot, and then a warmer shot. You can set it so your 3 little dots are on the blue amber axis. So we're going to get a cooler shot, a shot in the middle, which is what the camera considers the correct white balance for the particular setting you have, the particular lighting condition you have, and then a warmer shot. So once I press set and take those 3 images, so now we should have so it's quite subtle, but we've taken one normal, slightly cooler, and slightly warmer. So that lets you fine tune it by bracketing, by getting a little warmer, a little cooler. Or alternatively a little green or a little bit more magenta in those images. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to do custom white balance. Now that's really handy when you're in a situation where the camera is really not doing a great job at getting the white balance. And there's 2 ways of really doing it. There's one where you photograph a grey card, this is an 18% grey card, which you can buy relatively cheaply. If you take a photograph of a white card, then it basically underexposes it to get it to the grey level, and then tries to correct for the colour. But if you take a grey card, then you can take a photograph and it'll be the correct exposure, and then it can correct for the grey. My concern with using a white card is if you overexpose the image, then there's actually not enough colour. If you blow out the white card and make it too bright, there actually isn't enough coloured information in there. It basically clips it to full white, so it doesn't have the colour information to correct. Whereas if you shoot a grey card, then you know it's going to be in the middle of the exposure straight away. So how this works is you take a photo at any white balance setting. So you basically fill the frame with the grey card. So this is the light conditions I want to take it in, and so I fill the frame and then I take the shot. So that photograph I took there becomes your reference frame, and you can see straight away if it's kind of warmer or cooler because it won't look pure grey in there. And then what you do is you choose custom white balance, and then that allows you to select that image you've just taken. So you hit enter, and then it warns you that you need to actually set that custom white balance on your camera settings. So in this camera I have to go to the top there and set my white balance to custom, which is that little symbol there. So now the camera is going to use that information from the photograph of the grey card. If the lighting was slightly red or warm, the image of the grey card is going to have sort of warmer tones, and it'll have like a red or orange color cast. So the camera will correct for that to make this grey card perfectly grey. So now if I take another shot of that grey card and you look through the camera, you'll notice that now you have a perfectly grey image. So now once you've set that custom white balance and you take photographs of any other objects in the same lighting conditions, the white balance will be perfect. So now if I take a shot of my little set here, you see it's spot on colour. So that's totally accurate colour now, using that information from the grey card to effectively calibrate the white balance of the camera. Now there is another way of doing it too, which is one of my preferred ways of doing it when I'm outside and on location, and that's using an expo disc. And that's this little object here. It's basically a filter that fits in front of your camera, and it has this diffuser grid on it. And what that does is if you clip it on the front of your lens and you want to set this to manual focus because it's going to have trouble auto-focusing with that filter in the front there. It's not going to let you take the photograph. So set it to manual focus, and rather than taking a photograph away from the light onto the object like we did with the grey card, with the expo disc you actually face it to the main source of the lighting. So if I face it this way and I take a shot, and you can see it gives you a nice... Now in this case it's come out fairly accurate because I already took a white balance with the other card, but I'll redo that just to show you. So now if I choose custom white balance again, actually it does look a little bluer in this case, and I select this image, then we're ready to retake that shot with the custom white balance. So there we go, fairly accurate colour. So that's custom white balance. Now the way you set it varies with different cameras. With the Canons you generally take the reference image, you choose custom white balance option in the menu to actually select the image, and then you make sure that your white balance mode is set to custom, and it'll use that information. Now with the Nikons, they have what's called a preset, white balance preset, and with the Nikons you just point it at your object and select that, and as long as you frame it within the time frame your grey object, or in the case of the expo disc you can just put the expo disc, aim it at your light and hit that white balance preset mode, and it'll take a reading, and that information gets stored in the camera. It doesn't actually take the photograph. Now also with the Nikons you can select white balance from another image. So if you've taken a photograph that has the correct white balance for the particular light that you're in, you can actually choose to select the white balance settings from that image. So if you just go through your manual, you'll find how to do that as well. I'm just going to show you one way to understand how the camera corrects with the custom white balance. So if I take a shot of this grey card, now I go into the actual image, so that's our grey card reference image, and I call up the info. In some of these DSLRs you have the histogram, but in others you actually have a color histogram, and that shows you the red, green and blue levels. And you can see how they're not lined up because the color balance was incorrect, so we have way too much blue in this image. So that really shows you, okay, the camera is recognizing that the light was incorrect. So what custom white balance does, it'll correct for that. So now if I go into my menu and I set custom white balance to that image, select that image, and it's warning me I need to set the white balance to custom, and I select custom white balance. And now when I take a photograph with the grey card, you'll see the difference. You'll notice now that if I show you a preview of that image with the red, green and blue histogram showing, you'll notice the red, green and blue line up. So that's basically pure grey now. It's corrected for the color cast and the lights. One thing about the white balance bracketing, That's an option that you can choose as long as you don't have a raw format mode chosen. So if you're just on JPEG mode, then you can actually choose that white balance bracketing. Now the reason they do that is because when you're in camera raw mode, and I'm going to go more into this in the file formats video, but usually with these DSLRs you can choose JPEG only mode, and there's different settings for how fine or how large a JPEG you want to take. And the other option is RAW mode, and the Nikons and the Canons, they have different file names for those RAW modes. The RAW file format allows you to actually change your white balance settings on the computer afterwards. So you can take a photograph and then decide, okay, I want to choose a different white balance mode for that image later. Now I find that works great, but there's times when there's limits to how much you can set that white balance in RAW and still get accurate color. So it's best to actually use the gray card or the expo disc if white balance is critical and you really want to get spot on color, or at least set it to the correct kind of lighting conditions in your white balance settings, like set it to daylight or fluorescent lighting or whatever lighting you're in. Set it to that and at least try get close with your white balance, and then it's easier to correct that on the computer afterwards. So I hope that gives you a good idea of white balance and how to deal with it in your camera. Now, this particular video was to give you an overview of white balance, to give you an idea that there's different modes that you can set your white balance to, and you can shift your white balance just to make your images a little warmer, a little cooler, and you can set them to an actual color temperature, which is the temperature of your light, and that's in Kelvin. That's handy for synchronizing a few cameras to exactly the same white balance. And then finally we spoke about custom white balance. So with the custom white balance you can either photograph the gray card or photograph your lighting conditions through the expo disc, and that allows you to correct for any slight color variations you have in the lighting that you're taking your photographs in. There's certain situations where it's difficult getting your correct white balance, and one of those situations is if you're in a forest and there's lots of green leaves and light filtering through the green leaves. So what happens there is if you take a photograph of a grey card, because of all the green light hitting the grey card, and you use that as a reference for custom white balance, what you're going to find is your scene will actually be unnaturally warmed up, because it's going to take into account all that extra green light on the grey card, and it's going to compensate for that, so things will start looking a little bit too magenta-y. So in those situations you may actually have to go onto the Kelvin setting and correct for that. Either set it to a particular Kelvin or do that correction where you can take out some of the magenta, because it's basically creating too much magenta, trying to compensate for that green light. So you can actually push it up to the green side of the scale, and that'll actually be more the lighting that you're in. And there's certain circumstances too where you don't want perfectly accurate color, you actually want to have a bit of warmth. So if you're in a situation where you're trying to take sunset photographs and you actually want some of that warmth of the sun, you don't want everything to look pure white, because in a sunset situation things do have a warm light over them, that orangey sort of light. So you want to actually capture some of that warmth in your image. And so if you take the photograph and you're finding that you've lost a lot of that warmth, then you can do that, either set that Kelvin setting to a cooler light and then it'll compensate by making a warmer image, or you actually just do that white balance correction where you can drag it over to the amber side to give you more of that warmth of a sunset. Set to auto. This is white balance set to daylight, which is pretty close to auto. Auto is doing a fairly good job. This is white balance set to shade, which is expecting much cooler light, so the image comes out a lot warmer. White balance set to cloudy, which is not quite as cool as shade, so the image is not as warm. This is when the image is set to indoor light bulb, incandescent light. So you can see it's making the outdoor scene a lot cooler, a lot more blue in the image. And this is setting the white balance to fluorescent, regular fluorescent lighting. So this is setting it to high temperature fluorescent light, which is a much cooler light. So when you set it to this, it's expecting cooler light. So what happens is the image ends up being warmer. So this is our scene with custom white balance, which is creating a much more accurate image and with a little bit of warmth because the sun's starting to set. So hopefully that helps you out with just trying to think of white balance. And like I said at the beginning of this video series on white balance, that if you shoot on auto white balance, most of the time it'll give you correct color. But knowing how white balance works and how to correct for it is handy in situations where color is critical. So in the next series of videos, we're going to go into focusing techniques and depth of field. So jump into those when you're ready.